Sarah Martinez wiped the grease from her hands with an old rag, her eyes scanning the hangar where dozens of military aircraft stood in perfect rows. She had been working at Air Force Base for 3 years now, but still felt like an outsider among the seasoned pilots and mechanics who dominated the facility. Her father had been a mechanic here for 25 years before his retirement, and Sarah had grown up listening to his stories about the incredible machines that flew overhead. When she finally got her engineering degree and landed a job at the same base, she thought she would find acceptance among people who shared her passion for aviation. Instead, she found herself constantly defending her ideas and fighting for respect in a world that seemed determined to keep her on the sidelines. The other engineers tolerated her presence, but rarely took her suggestions seriously. The pilots barely acknowledged her existence, treating her like just another ground crew member whose job was to keep their planes running. Everything changed the day Colonel Harrison announced the new stealth aircraft development program. The military was looking for innovative designs that could push the boundaries of current technology, and they were accepting proposals from anyone on the base, regardless of rank or experience. Sarah saw this as her chance to prove herself. She had been working on aircraft design since college, sketching and calculating in her spare time. Her notebooks were filled with ideas for improving engine efficiency, reducing radar signatures, and enhancing maneuverability. Most of her colleagues knew about her hobby, but they dismissed it as the naive dreams of someone who didn't understand the complexities of real military aviation. When Sarah submitted her proposal for what she called the reaction was immediate and harsh. The design featured an unconventional wing configuration, an experimental engine system, and materials that most people had never heard of. To the experienced engineers and pilots who reviewed it, the whole concept seemed like science fiction. Lieutenant Commander Richards was particularly vocal in his criticism. During the presentation meeting, he stood up and pointed at Sarah's blueprints with obvious disdain. His voice carried across the room as he explained why her design would never work in the real world. "This is exactly the kind of theoretical nonsense we get when people spend too much time with books and not enough time in actual aircraft," he said, drawing chuckles from several other pilots. "The wing design alone violates basic principles of aerodynamics, and don't get me started on this fantasy engine system." Major, one of the senior engineers, shook his head as he looked at the proposal. "Sarah, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this isn't a college project. We're dealing with multi-million-dollar aircraft that need to perform in combat situations. We can't afford to experiment with untested concepts." The criticism stung, but Sarah had expected it. She had spent months preparing for every possible objection, researching every component of her design until she could defend it from every angle. But as she tried to explain her reasoning, she could see the skeptical looks on the faces around her. Captain Wilson interrupted her explanation with a dismissive wave of his hand. "The materials you're proposing don't even exist in quantities large enough for aircraft construction, and even if they did, the cost would be astronomical. This whole project reads like a wish list rather than a serious engineering proposal." The meeting ended with her proposal being politely but firmly rejected. As people filed out of the room, Sarah heard the whispered conversations and suppressed laughter that followed her. Some of the comments were meant to be overheard. "She actually thinks that thing could fly," someone muttered behind her. "Give her credit for creativity, I guess," another voice added with obvious sarcasm. Back in her small office, Sarah stared at the rejection letter that arrived the next day. It was professional and courteous, thanking her for her interest and encouraging her to continue developing her skills. But between the lines, she could read the real message: stick to maintenance work and leave the real engineering to the professionals. The ridicule didn't stop with the official rejection. Over the following weeks, she noticed people pointing at her in the cafeteria and whispering among themselves. Someone had nicknamed her aircraft the Ghost because, as they joked, it would disappear as soon as someone tried to fly it. Lieutenant approached her one day as she was working on a routine engine inspection. "Hey, Sarah, how's your invisible plane coming along?" he asked with a grin. "Still planning to revolutionize aviation with that paper airplane of yours?" The jokes became a daily occurrence. People would make references to her fantasy aircraft whenever she offered suggestions during meetings. Her colleagues would ask if she had any other impossible inventions they should know about. The constant mockery began to wear down her confidence and make her question her own abilities. But Sarah refused to give up on her design. Every evening after work, she returned to her apartment and continued refining the blueprints. She researched new materials, recalculated aerodynamic properties, and worked out solutions to the technical challenges that her critics had raised. Months passed, and the base settled into its normal routine of training exercises and equipment maintenance. Sarah's aircraft had become a running joke among the personnel, brought up whenever someone wanted to lighten the mood or tease the young engineer who thought she could outsmart decades of aviation experience. She learned to ignore the comments and focus on her work, but the constant dismissal of her ideas made her more determined than ever to prove that innovation shouldn't be limited by conventional thinking. Little did anyone know that her seemingly impossible design had caught the attention of someone far above their pay grade, and that there was about to become much more than just a source of amusement for bored military personnel. 6 months after Sarah's proposal was rejected, strange things began happening at Air Force Base. Security was tightened around certain hangars, and personnel were restricted from areas that had previously been accessible. Construction crews arrived to work on mysterious projects behind heavily guarded fences, and the sound of unfamiliar aircraft engines could be heard during late-night hours. Sarah noticed the changes but didn't think much of them at first. Military bases were always conducting classified operations, and as a civilian contractor, she wasn't privy to most of the sensitive information that flowed through the facility. Her job was to maintain the aircraft she was assigned to work on, not to ask questions about activities beyond her security clearance. The first sign that something unusual was happening came when Dr. Elizabeth arrived at the base. Doctor was a legendary figure in aerospace engineering, known for her work on cutting-edge stealth technology and advanced materials research. She had developed some of the most sophisticated aircraft systems in the world, and her presence at any facility usually meant that something revolutionary was in development. Sarah only saw Doctor from a distance during her first few weeks on the base, but she noticed that the renowned scientist spent a lot of time in meetings with Colonel Harrison and other high-ranking officials. There were also frequent visits from civilians in expensive suits who carried briefcases and spoke in hushed tones about classified matters. The mystery deepened when Sarah was approached by Sergeant Davis, who worked in the restricted section of the base. They had known each other since Sarah's first day and he had always been friendly despite the ridicule she faced from others. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, but I can't explain why," he said quietly as they stood near the maintenance hangar. "Do you still have those blueprints you submitted for that aircraft design, the one everyone was making fun of?" The question caught her off guard. She hadn't thought about the proposal in weeks, having forced herself to focus on her regular duties instead of dwelling on the rejection. "Yes, I still have all my research and designs. Why do you ask?" Sergeant Davis looked around nervously before responding. "I can't say much, but there are people asking questions about your work. Important people. You should make sure those documents are secure." Before Sarah could ask for more details, he walked away quickly, leaving her with more questions than answers. That evening, she gathered all her research and stored it in a locked filing cabinet in her apartment, wondering who might be interested in her supposedly impossible aircraft design. The answer came 2 weeks later when Sarah received an unexpected summons to report to Colonel Harrison's office. She had never been called to see the base commander before, and she spent the entire walk across the facility wondering what she might have done wrong. Colonel Harrison's office was larger and more formal than she had expected, with walls covered in military decorations and photographs from decades of service. But what surprised her most was that she wasn't alone in the meeting. Doctor was sitting at the conference table, along with 2 men in civilian clothes who introduced themselves only by their first names. "Miss Martinez," Colonel Harrison began, his tone more respectful than she had ever heard from any superior officer. "We need to discuss your aircraft proposal, the one you submitted 6 months ago." Sarah felt her heart racing as she tried to process what was happening. "Sir, that proposal was rejected. I was told it wasn't practical for military applications." Doctor leaned forward with an expression that Sarah couldn't quite read. "Miss Martinez, what you submitted wasn't just practical. It was brilliant. Your design solved problems that our best engineers have been struggling with for years. The unconventional wing configuration that people criticized. It actually provides superior stealth characteristics and maneuverability compared to current designs. One of the civilian men opened a thick folder and spread out documents across the table. Sarah recognized her own blueprints, but they were now covered with additional notes, calculations, and modifications. "We've been studying your proposal in detail," he explained. "With some adjustments and access to classified materials, this aircraft is not only possible but potentially revolutionary." Colonel Harrison stood and walked to a large map on the wall. "Miss Martinez, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Your aircraft design has been selected for a black budget development program. We've been working on a prototype for the past 5 months." The room fell silent as Sarah tried to absorb this information. Her rejected, ridiculed design was not only being taken seriously, but had actually been built. "Are you telling me that the exists?" "More than exists," Doctor replied with a slight smile. "It flies, and it performs beyond our most optimistic projections. The stealth capabilities are unprecedented, the maneuverability exceeds anything in our current fleet, and the efficiency of your engine design has impressed even our most skeptical test pilots." The second civilian man pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a video that made her gasp. There, taxiing down a runway she didn't recognize, was an aircraft that looked exactly like her blueprints had envisioned. The sleek, angular lines were unmistakable, and as she watched it take off, she could see that every detail matched her original design. "This footage was taken 3 days ago during the aircraft's 15th test flight," Colonel Harrison explained. "The test pilot reported that it handled like nothing he had ever experienced. The stealth systems worked so well that our own radar operators lost track of it for 20 minutes during the flight." Sarah stared at the screen, watching her impossible dream soar through the sky with an elegance that even she hadn't fully imagined. "But why all the secrecy? Why was my proposal rejected if you were planning to build it anyway?" Doctor exchanged glances with the other men before answering. "Because we needed to test your design without any external pressure or expectations. If word had gotten out that we were seriously considering such an unconventional aircraft, it would have attracted attention from foreign intelligence services and defense contractors. The ridicule you faced was unfortunate but necessary cover for our investigation." The weight of this revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. All the mockery, the dismissive comments, the jokes about her fantasy aircraft, it had all been a deliberate deception to protect a project that was actually being developed in secret. "So everyone who made fun of my design was in on this?" "Not everyone," Colonel Harrison clarified. "Most of the personnel who criticized your work were expressing genuine skepticism. Only a handful of people knew about the real project. We had to maintain operational security while we determined whether your design was viable." One of the civilians leaned back in his chair and studied Sarah carefully. "Miss Martinez, we have a proposition for you. We want you to join the development team as the lead designer on the project. Your insights will be crucial as we prepare the aircraft for operational deployment." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. In the span of 30 minutes, she had gone from being a ridiculed maintenance engineer to being offered a position on one of the most advanced aerospace projects in the world. "I don't understand. Why me? You have Doctor and presumably other experienced engineers working on this." "Because it's your vision," Doctor responded firmly. "No one understands this aircraft better than its creator. We can handle the manufacturing and testing, but we need you to guide the continued development. There are still challenges to overcome, and we believe you're the person most likely to solve them." As Sarah left the meeting with a stack of security clearance paperwork and a new badge that would give her access to the restricted areas of the base, she realized that her entire world had changed in a single afternoon. Tomorrow, she would see her aircraft up close for the first time and meet the team that had been secretly bringing her vision to life. But tonight, she would have to continue pretending that there was still just a failed proposal, maintaining the fiction that had protected one of the most important military projects in recent history. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the classified hangar, watching as technicians made final preparations for its most important mission yet. The aircraft had evolved significantly from her original design, incorporating advanced materials and systems that she had only dreamed about during her college years. But at its core, it remained the same revolutionary concept that her colleagues had dismissed as impossible. Working on the project had been both exhilarating and surreal. During the day, she continued her regular duties maintaining conventional aircraft, listening to the same jokes about her fantasy plane that had tormented her for months. But in the evenings and on weekends, she worked with some of the most brilliant aerospace engineers in the country, refining a machine that was already changing the future of military aviation. The secrecy had been the hardest part. When Lieutenant made his usual comments about her invisible aircraft, she had to bite her tongue to keep from revealing that her plane wasn't just visible. It was performing better than any aircraft in the current fleet. When Major dismissed her suggestions during engineering meetings, she couldn't mention that those same suggestions were being implemented on a project worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Doctor had become both a mentor and a friend during those intense months of development. She helped Sarah navigate the complex world of classified research while encouraging her to think even bigger about future aircraft designs. "This is just the beginning," she had told Sarah during one late-night work session. "The proves that innovation doesn't come from following established patterns. It comes from people who dare to imagine something completely new." The test flights had been flawless. Major Kate, the lead test pilot, reported that the aircraft handled like a dream and performed beyond every specification. The stealth capabilities were so advanced that enemy radar systems couldn't detect the even when it was flying directly overhead. The speed and maneuverability allowed it to outperform any known aircraft in simulated combat scenarios. But the real test was coming today. It was about to be revealed to the world during a major military demonstration attended by defense officials, foreign allies, and members of Congress. After months of secrecy, Sarah's creation would finally step into the spotlight. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same people who had ridiculed her design would be watching it demonstrate capabilities they had claimed were impossible. Lieutenant Commander Richards, who had been particularly vocal in his criticism, was scheduled to attend the demonstration as part of his duties with the evaluation committee. As Sarah walked across the base toward the demonstration area, she passed groups of personnel who were gathering to watch the event. The base commander had announced that a new aircraft would be unveiled, but no details had been provided. Speculation was running wild among the pilots and engineers who thought they understood everything about current military aviation. "I heard it's some kind of upgraded fighter jet," one technician was saying to his colleagues. "Probably just a new paint job and some updated electronics." "Whatever it is, it can't be that revolutionary," another voice added. "Real breakthroughs in aviation take decades to develop. This is probably just an incremental improvement on existing technology." Sarah smiled to herself as she listened to these conversations. In a few hours, these same people would be watching her impossible aircraft demonstrate capabilities that would redefine their understanding of what was possible in aerospace engineering. The demonstration area was filled with hundreds of spectators, including military personnel from multiple branches, defense contractors, and government officials. Sarah took her place in a special section reserved for project personnel, her new security badge giving her access to areas that most base personnel could never enter. Colonel Harrison stepped up to the podium and began addressing the crowd. His voice carried clearly across the demonstration area as he explained that they were about to witness the unveiling of a groundbreaking aircraft that represented years of classified research and development. This aircraft incorporates revolutionary design principles and advanced technologies that will give our forces unprecedented capabilities in future conflicts, he announced. The project has been developed in complete secrecy to protect our strategic advantages and ensure that potential adversaries cannot develop countermeasures. As he spoke, Sarah noticed Lieutenant Commander Richards sitting with a group of senior pilots just a few rows ahead of her. He was chatting casually with his colleagues, clearly expecting to see an impressive but conventional military aircraft. Major was also in attendance, checking his watch and looking like he wished he could be somewhere else. The sound of approaching engines drew everyone's attention to the sky. In the distance, an aircraft was approaching the base, but it was moving with a speed and agility that seemed almost supernatural. The crowd fell silent as they realized this wasn't like any aircraft they had ever seen before. It appeared suddenly overhead, as if materializing from thin air. Its stealth capabilities had kept it invisible to radar until the last moment, and its silent approach had prevented anyone from hearing it coming. The aircraft performed a series of maneuvers that everything the spectators thought they knew about the laws of physics and aerodynamics. It rolled, dove, and climbed with an agility that made conventional fighter jets look clumsy by comparison. The engine system that Sarah had designed allowed for thrust vectoring capabilities that enabled the aircraft to change direction almost instantly. As it flew directly over the crowd at low altitude, the only sound was a whisper-quiet hum that was barely audible even from 50 feet away. Lieutenant Commander Richards stood up slowly, his mouth open in shock as he watched the aircraft perform maneuvers he had believed were impossible. Around him, other pilots and engineers were pointing and trying to understand what they were seeing. The wing design that he had criticized for violating basic aerodynamics was clearly working better than any conventional configuration they had ever witnessed. Major was frantically taking notes, trying to analyze the aircraft's performance characteristics. The same engineering principles he had dismissed as fantasy were being demonstrated with an effectiveness that exceeded anything in the current military inventory. The aircraft landed with a grace that made it look like it was floating rather than touching down on the runway. As it taxied toward the demonstration area, people could see the sleek, angular lines that gave it an almost alien appearance compared to traditional military aircraft. Colonel Harrison returned to the podium as the engine spooled down. The crowd was completely silent, still processing what they had just witnessed. Ladies, you have just seen the first operational flight of the most advanced stealth aircraft ever developed by the United States military. He paused to let this information sink in before continuing. This aircraft was designed by someone who works right here at Air Force Base, someone whose innovative thinking and refusal to accept conventional limitations has created a machine that will change military aviation forever. Sarah felt her heart pounding as she realized what was coming next. After months of secrecy and years of ridicule, her identity as the creator was about to be revealed to everyone who had dismissed her work. The lead designer of the is Sarah Martinez, who submitted the original proposal for this aircraft 8 months ago. Despite facing skepticism and criticism from many people who should have known better, she never stopped believing in her vision. Today, her persistence and brilliance have given America a strategic advantage that will protect our nation for decades to come. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stood up slowly as hundreds of faces turned toward her, their expressions showing everything from shock to embarrassment to genuine admiration. Lieutenant Commander Richards looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Major was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite identify. As applause finally began to ripple through the crowd, Sarah realized that her journey from ridiculed engineer to respected innovator was complete. The same people who had joked about her fantasy aircraft were now applauding the woman who had created the most advanced military aircraft in the world. But more importantly, she had proven that innovation doesn't come from following established rules. It comes from having the courage to imagine something better, even when everyone around